and then it just becomes an industry of cool.
It's not about money and popularity, although some money would be nice. Most of the time, the best stuff is the popular stuff. It's much safer to say popularity sucks, because that allows you to forgive yourself if you suck. And I don't forgive myself.
You gotta take what you can, when you can, while you can, and you gotta do it now. That's what the big boys do.
I mean, I'm telling you, you're coming along at a very dangerous time for rock and roll. I mean, the war is over. They won. Now, 99% of what passes for rock and roll these days, silence is more compelling.
Wanna see my smiling face on the cover of the Rolling Stone?
You've got starry eyes, my friend. Well, hello lovelies. This is my glam rock attempt for what I would do if I was a glam rocker. You chose the rose gold, by the way. If you're not following me on Instagram, I put another call out. That's how we have this parasocial relationship connection. Instagram, YouTube, community tab, subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. My subscriptions keep on fluctuating because YouTube's doing that thing where they are unsubscribing people, so just as a heads up, if you can please subscribe, that would be very helpful because, oh my gosh, I'd love to hit 4K. Obviously, this is part 2 to last week's very big, very long video that kind of destroyed me. Even though it's probably my favourite video that I've actually done, it still sort of destroyed me. I had to actually take a day off work because I was literally this.
And I'm retired and I'm tired.
So this video I'm hoping to keep to 25 minutes max. So let's see, have I done it? I don't know. Obviously you know that Almost Famous is my favourite movie. Technically it's untitled, but that's not SEO friendly. Last week we peeled back the curtain on groupies, but this week we're on to the main event. Sort of. The smoke and mirrors around rock stars and the subsequent issues and consequences of that. Rock journalism, the management and lifestyle that must be upheld in order to create the industry of cool. Also, trigger warnings for this video: death, OD and addiction. I don't really go too in depth, but I always want you to be prepared because I never want people to have a bad time when watching my videos. I'm saying all of this as a genuine fan of rock music as well, from the 60s to today. I mean, heck, I even like the music of some of the crappy 80s hair metal bands and listened to that heaps when I was like 18 to 21. I'm on specifically about the image of rock stars and the expectations of what a real rock star should be and the damaging impacts of that. Not against rock music as a whole because, oh my gosh, still a huge fan. Even when sourcing clips for this video, I was just having a jam session. My issues really do just come around the lack of accountability and the huge issues that were actually born because of this glorification of this particular image. A journalist's struggle. So reading a lot of articles from journalists about their opinions on Almost Famous the movie, it's kind of universally agreed that this is not an accurate representation of what it's like to be a rock journalist. Shocker! A movie not being true to life? Get out of town. Cameron Crowe's experience was a rarity at the time because he actually went on tour with the Eagles for months on end, like very early on in his career in the early 70s. That just didn't happen. Journalism these days is akin to an uncredited scrap fight for low pay or for free, and you know, with the internet, their job is even harder to get. And you add into that stan culture where people will literally uncover every little thing about your life and dox you for the fact that you didn't like track 6 on an album. Plus the ability to actually have time with the bands to be able to ask them questions. But wait, you have a publicist to deal with who has to vet every question beforehand. You only have like 45 minutes with them. And also they're being interviewed by a whole bunch of other people normally. So yay, press junkets, yay, super control now. I wonder why people need to control the image of people. The world and mystique of rock and roll was created. Rock and roll evolved from the blues and then it got appropriated by white people in the 50s, and then it kind of grew and grew and grew to be what we know of as like the golden age of rock, where questionable things were happening all the time. The image of this rock star life and legacy was upheld for many years by Jan Wenner, which is a name that I'm sure that not many of you actually know, but he was the one that created Rolling Stone magazine. He did this in 1967 with his eyes on the prize from the start: fame and money. But you know, not just for the rockers, but for himself as well. And our own Cameron Crowe worked there for 6 years, starting in 1973, the wide-eyed 16-year-old who was eager to learn, listen and craft great narratives. His first ever cover story, which was on the Allman Brothers, along with his many other work with Rolling Stone, eventually formed Almost Famous, a movie he agonized over, probably with some fear of revealing secrets he shouldn't as well, because whilst his writing was good, he kept those relationships with bands because he was so nice, a genuine fan. He was the one Rolling Stone sent to bands who hated Rolling Stone magazine. He was their snake in the grass. However, this snake didn't really bite, let alone with the venom of someone that is honest and unmerciful. Let's talk about Jan Wenner's creation of the Golden Gods. So there is a book by Joe Hagan called Sticky Fingers, The Life and Times of Jan Wenner and Rolling Stone magazine. It goes far more into detail about this, and it's definitely not what you'd call an authorized biography, because Jan Wenner actually hates it because it shatters all of the illusions about him right from the start. I was reading an article from FT.com which talked about Rolling Stone and rock journalism. It was a man's magazine, though women read it. It was a white magazine, though African Americans were fetishized in it. It was a left-wing magazine, though it was tempered by Wenner's devotion to the establishment. And honestly, this brilliant piece of writing by Andrew Flanagan on NPR, I'll have that link below, obviously all of my sources are. So Jan created this magazine with a little bit of help from money. He was always kind of surrounded by it and dated Jane Schindelheim, whose father basically funded the endeavor, which of course gave her a 50% split in the company. Honestly, smart woman, you should definitely do that. Now these two did marry, however there were a lot of affairs. He was very closeted for a very long time. Honestly, we're more interested in the rock journal side of things as opposed to his life. Like I said, look at those links, read the book. Rolling Stone magazine basically allowed and encouraged men to ogle at the male stars in the same way that teen girls did, and capitalized off that same frenzy of youth culture, but had a more gritty writing style with the likes of, you know, Hunter S. Thompson. I'm sure that if you know anything about rock music, you'll know of his name. The image of the rock star with the raw sensuality, the slightly haggard appearance as if on a continuous party loop with other beautiful people, and a slight twinkle of secret sharing in their eyes, and you have a winning formula of mythos and prodigy, which Jan encouraged them to curate as well. He wanted to be close to and actually favoured particular bands, in particular the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. Couldn't tell from what he named the magazine. And he was also a very petty person. He would shun people if he thought that they'd wronged him, and honestly would like put them through the ringer in the magazine if he didn't like what a band did to him. Very, is vindictive the right word? Possibly. But this had a lot of power to it because Rolling Stone magazine had a very captive audience. He wanted the same tennis and candy lifestyle and partook in all the grandiosity of it all, and took part in amounts of candy that are completely unimaginable beyond a cartel. He wasn't afraid to snuggle up to the record labels for the ad space, nor say yes to the fancy ski trips in order to favour whatever bands they wanted, and shun those who wouldn't try to buy their way in. It's capitalism at its finest, my dear, not counterculture. Lester Bangs was right.
You know, these are people who want you to write sanctimonious stories about the genius of rock stars, and they will ruin rock and roll and strangle everything we love about it.
It wasn't driven by artistry, morals, appreciation, and questioning the man. It was about money, it was about greed. To which people may cry out, but that's what all businesses do, they're just here to make money. To which I just say, please do not placate your overlords. The war is over, capitalism won. You don't need to smile when you bow. Rolling Stone allegedly inspired Bruce Springsteen with the way that he thought that he should look and act and dress, but I'm positive it didn't just shape him, it had a cultural impact far beyond just fetishizing Britney Spears in that infamous photo shoot. Jan was at the helm for 50 years of this magazine, and it was a huge part in creating the glorified culture of rock stars, of creating this fandom, untouchability, irresistibility, danger and mystique, while still being able to make bank and feign that Rolling Stone cared about politics when it would benefit their pockets. It helped to make rock stars into a brand. Then later on, these same rock stars that were all about anarchy and Sex Pistols suddenly managed to go on to make adverts about butter and be Trump supporters and Brexit supporters. It's so in sync with what punk was all about, right? The glorification of ass hats. There is no nicer way to put it. A lot of people who were stars got away with acting in the most abhorrent ways possible, with merely even a slap on the wrist or a fine or anything happen to damage them in any way, as we talked about last week in that video. In fact, in a lot of cases there was outright applause for them for being able to embrace this sort of childlike whimsy of misbehaving so publicly, and you just didn't know what they were going to do next. It was so entertaining. And this weird fantasy of this boy who never grew up but then went on to become a rock star that got to sleep with a lot of girls and didn't have to worry about it when he smashed his guitar, trashed hotel rooms and did all sorts of other terrible stuff. The thing is that a lot of the way that people were actually acting out wasn't really against the man. It didn't impact the man at all. In fact, it disproportionately impacted people that were already being trampled on to begin with. It impacted service workers, fans, groupies, female fans in particular. It really wasn't trying to make systemic change about creating equality. Let's just put it that way. But hey, it made for great headlines, right? And that's what matters, because that's what sells Rolling Stone magazine and all the other tabloids. There was some like Jim Morrison from The Doors, who did unpredictable and erratic performances, Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, who was, quote, mad, bad and dangerous to know, unquote, Keith Moon from The Who had a reputation for trashing hotel rooms, amongst other things like dressing up like a Nazi for a prank just to see what reaction he would get. Now also, you know the original bat that got thrown on stage that Ozzy bit the head off? He didn't actually know it was real until after he did it, and then it just became this ongoing thing. Just casual animal abuse live on stage in front of people that became a thing. But all of this got mixed up with the truthful poetry, brutal honesty, and sure, sometimes people were truly saying something like Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Jimi Hendrix, Simon and Garfunkel, to name but a few. But a lot of the rock star noise was just that, like noise. Noise of undirected white male frustration, which so happened to get them laid, especially as time went on and you look at the hair metal bands of the 80s. It really was this quote.
It's a voice that says, here I am, and fuck you if you can't understand me. And one of these people is gonna save the world. And that means that rock and roll can save the world, all of us together.
Oh, honey.
It was about individualistic cowboy mavericks of unaccountable behavior that is similar to how a villain would be portrayed in a high school movie these days. But it did used to be celebrated like in Top Gun and Die Hard. I mean, you gotta love that propaganda. How many people still love Die Hard and quote it as their favorite Christmas movie? All I'm saying is that propaganda is very powerful. There were some rock stars who were trying to change things, others quite simply just wanted to party, you know.
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
For a lot of this white male rage that was actually happening at the time and against the man, it was so undirected, it really was. And may I remind you of the comfortableness of some punk bands with using the Nazi symbol in order to provoke a reaction, in order to be edgy and cause offense, as opposed to actually seeing it as like the symbol of death. It kind of really was for millions of people. Just the comfortableness with that because of this white male privilege. I know some people will have problems with me for saying it, but it's like the leaps and bounds that you have to go through ethically and morally to think that that is an okay thing to do. Either that or you've just coasted by on being so privileged your whole life that you don't even see it as being a problem. Like, I'm pretty sure that in the 70s they'd learnt about World War II. I mean, hell, even if you didn't learn about it in school, everyone watched The Sound of Music, right? I'm pretty sure I don't know any older person who hasn't seen that movie. My god. Now, Rolling Stone magazine loved this too because it made for sellable magazines. The more outrageous, the better. They could come across as either moralistic or hedonistic depending on what would sell better. Now, I'm not saying that the journalists aren't good journalists, and the photographers and a lot of people that have come out from working at Rolling Stone, amazing, wonderful people. I'm saying that the direction for what happened was because of Jan Wenner.
It goes along musicians' life and always has done, you know, because of the ups and downs, the adrenaline, the energy, the making the gig the next day when you're totally drained, and it's passed on from one generation of musicians to the next, you know. And looking back on it, I'm amazed that they didn't get onto it a lot earlier.
A dangerous image to uphold. The images created via the grandiose retellings of particular rock journalists who upheld the more is more mentality thanks to the works of Jan created real life consequences. ODs are no secret and people have sadly lost their lives to addiction, and as has been well documented sadly with quite a few rock stars. And people have sadly lost their lives to this image of buzzed out, hypersexualized, confident masculinity where limits are not applicable, otherwise you're a kitty cat. Now, I actually remember in one of the Foo Fighters documentaries, Back and Forth I believe it was, Taylor Hawkins, like rest his soul, so he actually fell prey to wanting to fulfill this image as well because it's what he knew, it's what all the rockers did, you know, it's just what you do. It's like you do the candy, you drink too much, you do all of this stuff. And he ended up ODing. I still remember that from the documentary and how everyone was talking about it. So this image really does have real consequences for people, even if it's not something that is as done today, because the legacy of the golden age of rock and what rock stars should be like. So this image that got bolstered and created sell these people as products to push boundaries. But you know, only in certain ways it would increase capital, not create systemic actual change that would improve the lives of many. It not only did damage to the fans that were only seen as a wallet, it did damage to the actual artists themselves. Something which has only continued to remain true is the band management, something that I believe Madison Brown is going to be making a video on. And the thing is that we all know the impact that record labels and management have on artists this day, where they have to literally make pleas on TikTok in order to be able to like try and release their art. Some may say it's a marketing gimmick, some may not, but the fact that we've actually gotten to this point where people can't be their authentic artistic selves is pretty worrying to me, with the effects of capitalism in the music industry and arts, which is a video I really want to talk about actually. Capitalism and art, do they mix? No. Ultimately, it's money through relevance that these companies want. So they want the virality. They want that like Kate Bush resurgence moment to happen. They want to have as much money that they can get from a hit. They don't care about the self-expression as much from the artist. They're like, no, you have to start off by making hits and then you can get creative. It happened with Whitney Houston, as we've talked about. It's happened with so many different artists, and still there is such a chokehold on artists to just be this thing that the record labels want them to be. So granted, it may not be their image, there's still a particular image which must be upheld to appease the people today. The last real rock stars of this ilk, it could be argued, are the Strokes from the 2000s. Even though Rolling Stone magazine actually chose to put Vines on their cover instead of the Strokes, which was the wrong decision, obviously. But being a rock star is a career after all. It's not a hobby. You have to pay the bills, and in order to pay the bills, you have to fit the image, the virality, and everything else to be able to get your name out there.
Honest. Unmerciful.
Just make us look cool.
I will quote you warmly and accurately.
That's what I'm worried about.
Writing what's real. Journalists are writing about real people in their lives, which I think is something that gets so easily forgotten these days, as we constantly have access to see all of the things that are happening in the world at all times. You watch a 15-second clip of someone losing their loved one to a fire, followed by a 15-second clip of a dog learning to do a trick, followed by a toothpaste ad these days. It's very easy for people to forget, because our brains aren't that smart, that we're actually dealing with real people's lives here. The impacts are genuinely real. I was reading an article in the New Yorker by Michael Azerrad as he spoke of meeting and befriending Kurt Cobain. He actually went on to write Come As You Are, The Story of Nirvana. He got on really well with Kurt and Courtney, but the management of the band was very worried about this book because they were worried it was going to be a candy expose. Michael actually wanted Kurt to read this as a courtesy before it got made into the book. Didn't want Courtney to be involved because Courtney is Courtney. If you know anything about Nirvana, I'm pretty sure you'll know what I mean. So they went off to this hotel and Kurt just read the book, and he was hurt by some of the things that were in there. He was like, oh man, do you have to have that in there? But Kurt did actually want things to be honest in a way that hadn't happened before when it comes to all these rock biographies. I mean, he was directly making this comparison. He was like, just not like Guns N' Roses, because again, if you know, you know. But there was actually a bigger impact here because his daughter Frances and custody of her was sort of riding on everything that Kurt was doing at this time, and he was so concerned about being able to be a good dad to her. So that was really eating at him as he was trying to get this book to actually go out there, be honest, but then also make sure he would still be able to be a father. Plus, it would be hard not to be worried about how you'd be perceived and the impacts on the band from this book coming out. To quote Michael, Kurt, being a student of rock history, knew that the story of a rock band is essentially a legend, in the sense that there's some wiggle room in the truth as long as it serves an overall myth. So Kurt was an unreliable narrator of his own story. That's nothing new. It would be hard to name any rock star who wasn't the same. It's up to the journalist to decide what's true and what isn't. But sometimes journalists play along because they're naive, lazy, or overworked, or they want to be in on the game because it makes for sensational copy. Whatever the reason, it works to the artist's advantage. I wasn't rigorous about investigating Kurt's mythologizing. For one thing, a tight deadline meant that I didn't have the time, and for another, he had charmed me, and I unquestioningly bought all his tall tales, which turned out well for him. Now, Kurt said that this was the best book he ever read, but it also most likely had inaccuracies in it, so therefore, as a journalist, you've failed in that way. But sometimes the myths and lies are what people actually want to read as opposed to the grim reality of the situation. Or worse, the dullness. And of course, potentially it could be less harmful to those around us. But in order to write what's real, surely we all realize that we don't want our own dirty laundry aired for everyone to pick apart and question everything, right? And I did purposefully pick Kurt because I know that people have are very sympathetic to him because they've got a lot of compassion because they know that he was suffering for a very long time. But would people be the same to Jan Wenner of Rolling Stone? One we acknowledge to have been suffering and want to treat with compassion. The other we're okay with getting torn asunder.
You hear it in bands all the time. It doesn't sound like music anymore, you know? It sounds like lifestyle maintenance or something.
Now, I don't know if rock stars will return to the level of the golden days, honestly, and I'm almost kind of glad for it. Like, there was a bit of a rock resurgence in the 2000s with pop punk, emo, and of course nu metal, but I don't think that we're going to get the deified images of rock stars of yore, which just upheld debauchery at the expense of all others, self-sabotage, addiction, and glorified this stuff in a very unhealthy manner. Granted, there's this whole argument that you made that people shouldn't all have to be role models, but that's for another video. When you really think about it in terms of rock stars of yore, the only people that I can really think of that actually uphold this sort of same mentality of reckless abandon, lack of care for anyone, people that were doing awful things to women with zero consequences, the only person I could really think of was Jake Paul. Granted, it's made him very rich, but yeah, definitely not what I'd be calling someone that we should really be putting on a pedestal, right? And I do understand the struggle of being a fan and also trying to have an objective look at things and bring into place context and everything. It's one of the reasons this movie resonates so strongly with me, as it really is a journey of fandom told through observation. But instead of Blade Runner's owl symbolism or The Great Gatsby's glasses billboard, instead we get the hopeful, saddened, besotted and disillusioned eyes of William Miller as a veneer peels off around him and the true cracks can be seen, but ultimately he'd rather pick up the varnish and try to patch it up than expose what's underneath. Now, I do try and fight the urge with the videos that I do to actually make sure to uncover the reality of the situation, but I also want to treat people with humanity, respect and a bit of compassion with the videos that I do, to not just be completely awful, and realize that humans are humans and everyone's going through different things. But ultimately I think that we can all agree that having all of these facades in place for people to create, honestly, crimes in a lot of cases, it's not really a system that should be upheld. It's a system that should be brought down. But as things have become more cagey, even though people demand authenticity of their stars these days, who really runs their own social media accounts these days? I can think of two people. One is Billie Eilish, the other is Britney Spears. I don't really know any people of that kind of level that really do run their own social media accounts. There's more smoke and mirrors today because there's more pressure on being right about doing things, and illusions don't really want to be shattered by people, I don't think. In the same way that people will have adverse reactions to the things that I've raised in this video and my last video and many of my videos, because stan culture is dangerous. If you did make it all the way to the end of this video, I think that there's a typewriter emoji or a computer emoji, just whatever sort of thing that you can tippity tap type or write with, then that would be great. I'd really appreciate it if you could just leave the emoji. There is no Smith Corona Galaxis Deluxe emoji, so sadly you can't do that, but still do leave one down below. I'd really appreciate it. I've stumbled over my words so many times in this video because I'm still absolutely exhausted. There will not be a video next week because I'm going to be working on a bigger video. I will have a poll up and you'll be deciding whether it's going to be on Jane Fonda or plastic surgery, so yeah, looking forward to that. Anyway, lovelies, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I am looking forward to hearing your hot takes down below as well. I'll see you again next time. Bye.
If you think Mick Jagger will still be out there trying to be a rock star at age 50, you're sadly mistaken. On the distasteful subject of money, just know that you're all making it right now. And it's all out there. I'm just talking about bringing it back here.